Fantastic. So, yeah, hi, I'm David Heyman, and today you get to listen to me attempt to be a voice actor and read from my duology, the first book of two, hence duology, The Mages of Madness. This is a comedy fantasy adventure, and it's kind of an omnibus thing because I've recently reworked a lot of stuff from six books into two because I'm crazy like that. But anyway, let's get into it. So this is a reading from the second part, which is Rebirth of the Mage. So, um, get my reading voice on. Eric heard the door open and close once more. Whether it was his parents returning or one of the guards leaving, he had no idea. However, he was more concerned than ever at the mention of taking him out and priests, since he only knew of one type of the latter. His curiosity was quickly satisfied when the guard leaned over him and sharply pulled. Eric knew he was pulling because he could feel something coming out of him. It was not painful, but on the whole incredibly disorienting and unsettling, like nails grating on stone. This feeling was intensified when the object finally freed itself with a sickeningly wet schlop, and the guard took a step back from the sudden lack of tension. Eric could now see that the guard was holding a sword, perhaps a spith long. The whole thing was slick with blood, presumably Eric's. Oh boy, I think it went into the floor. Mal is not going to believe it, Sai said, apparently to himself since there was no answer. Eric couldn't get the image of the sword out of his head. Even though Sai had now walked away from him, the bloody weapon was the only thing he could think about. Was that why he couldn't move? Obviously that was why. But look at the size of the thing. There was no way he would be alive if he'd been stabbed with that. Oh. The trail of thought led him to the one plausible, yet seemingly impossible conclusion that he was in fact very dead. It would, after all, explain why his mother had been crying, and why he couldn't do so much as blink, and why priests were now being called for him. After what felt like passes of staring up at the ceiling and catching the occasional glimpses of Sai doing whatever he had to do, Eric heard his door open again. This was soon followed by the sound of footsteps as more people came into his room. Had Eric been in a position to jump with surprise, he would have done so as two masked figures suddenly loomed over him. He recognized them as the priests of Erdas, as they were often seen around the city transporting the dead to their final resting places. Their masks were pure black, made from a material known only to the Order, and marked with a single, brilliantly white tear just under the eye. Neither priest spoke, but set about moving and wrapping him in some sort of white cloth. Purely out of instinct, Eric tried to call out to his parents again, to anyone who would then be able to point out to the priests that he wasn't dead, and that they didn't have to take him away. But of course no sound came forth, and Eric was forced to quietly endure the manhandling of his body before he was completely covered in cloth. He felt himself being lifted up and placed onto a hard surface before this too was raised up, and he started to move in a more lateral direction. He heard his mother crying again as he was taken away, outside into the streets, judging by the sunlight now shining through the cloth. Everyone in the streets gave the priests a wide berth as they carried the body down the road. It was considered rude to delay the dead's transit, though no one was entirely sure why. The Temple of the Dead was a reasonably simple but sturdy-looking affair, a large square building formed from huge black stone slabs. The only adornment was a giant silver statue on the roof, supposedly of Erdas. Still, these passes no one really quite knew who that was, other than being the place where the dead went. Legend had it that they were the Lord of the Dead, a god of the underworld, which would have made this a pretty scary place. Fortunately, modern thinking had proven all that to be nonsense. But people still had to go somewhere when they died, and other people had to take them there. This was the role of the priests of Erdas, who were more like a combination of apothecary and grim postal worker than spiritual leader. That said, its contrasting color from the lighter whites and yellows of the local stone buildings made it seem all the more foreboding. There were rumors that it was actually even older than the palace, though no records were able to prove such claims. The priest soberly carried Eric into the dark maw of the temple's entrance and down into the heart of the building. The journey had been incredibly unpleasant for Eric thus far, but suddenly being in total darkness was somehow worse. Out of sheer desperation, he tried calling out again. Though he made no sound, he was surprised by a strange tingling sensation that started in his stomach and slowly crept up to his chest. The priest had now stopped moving, and Eric braced himself for the worst as they dropped his body onto the floor like a slab of meat, the sudden pain causing him to inhale deeply for the first time that pass. So much for respecting the dead, he thought to himself, before the realization that he was breathing again sunk in. He tried to move his arms, but either he had not yet gained his strength back, or the cloth was too restrictive. However, he could blink, and it was the most glorious feeling. Jumping ahead a little bit here. As the priest set about his work, Eric felt the cloth being loosened around him as he was slowly freed from his prison of linen. With the last of the cloth gone, Eric was finally able to see his surroundings, or at least he could make out the weird grey shadows of his surroundings. After blinking a few times, his eyes slowly adjusted to the torch's low light, and he noticed the priest was staring down at him while pointing a very accusatory finger. He had seen the supposedly dead boy blinking, and was having quite a hard time dealing with this new information. You're moving, he quietly exclaimed. Eric nodded, not yet trusting his voice to work properly. No, this is all wrong. The priest seemed more thoughtful than frightened now. You can't be here if you're not dead, or a priest. You're not a priest, are you? He asked hopefully. Eric shook his head this time. Well, this is just awful. We have some pretty strict rules about all this stuff, you know. The priest paced back and forth while he spoke. Why? Eric managed to croak. The priest stopped suddenly, lost in thought. Eventually, he looked back at Eric and answered, I don't know, but we just do. Same reason we wear the masks. It's traditional. It seemed as sensible a reason as any, so Eric dropped the subject. I don't think this has ever happened before. What are we going to do? How do you feel about becoming a priest? The man was working himself into more and more of a state as he paced about the dark room. Eric gave a slight shrug. He'd never really given the idea of work much thought, assuming he would be taking over his father's small fishing business. The priest shrieked and clicked his fingers, causing Eric to very quickly shimmy away and in the process fall off the table. This made the priest shriek again, though more in surprise this time. What was that for? Groaned Eric. Sorry, I had an idea. Then you moved and I forgot you were not dead again for a moment. This is a very emotional time for me right now. Right, said Eric as he slowly stood up. What's your plan? I think it's pretty good, actually. What if you were never here? Then there's no more problem, right? I'll just go over there, clean up some stuff, and then you can go be anywhere but here. Yeah, okay, I can do that, agreed Eric. Wonderful news. It was very nice never meeting you, said the priest, before shuffling off into a corner of the room and doing his best to look busy. Thank you very much.
Okay, David, I think we have a question for you there as well. It's actually by me, so I'm going to ask it. I'm doing this. I'm interjecting because people keep forgetting to look at the questions people asking it. So I was like, I'll do it this way. So David, how does your approach differ when writing comedy fantasy to a more epic fantasy?
I'd love to answer that, but unfortunately, I only know how to write funny things because that's how my brain works. Um, so I've tried writing serious books, and in fact, I've done for a couple of writing contests some more sort of serious-ish science fiction, but it still always ends up being a little bit on the funny side. Um, so I can't really answer that. Sorry, that's kind of I'm very much that's how my brain works.
Okay, so I'll ask it. I'll ask it slightly differently. Do you think there's a different expectation for when people see comedy fantasy? Do you think there's a different expectation in people's minds on when they think of
Oh, okay.
is this going to be funny or not?
Sure. I mean, I get quite luckily a lot of comparisons to things like Discworld and Pratchett, which I think is unfair to Terry Pratchett to have me compared to him. But yeah, I think people definitely go into those sorts of books with an idea of because you've got things like Discworld, which is so well established in that zone of comedy fantasy, and then compared to say like The Wheel of Time as your sort of your epic. You know, you're not going to expect a sort of a Vimes character suddenly turn up there, which yeah, it can make it a little difficult trying to hit the right kind of tone and expectations as you're writing without getting into like the slapstick side, which I think is another element again.
Excellent stuff. Well, everyone listening, please check out David's book he was reading from Major's Madness, First Grounds Geology. I have put the link in the chat, so please check that out. If you're listening on or watching on YouTube, the link will be there as well. Thank you, David. Next up, all the way from Australia, on the other side of the planet, to where I am anyway, is Neen Cohen. Take it away, Neen. Thank you, David.
Hiya. Yeah, I'm at the arse end of the world. And yeah, that's all good. I will be reading today from Coffee Cars and Necromancy. So yeah, keeping with the death theme, why not? Sounds like a great idea. Mine's not nearly as funny, or well, at times it's supposed to be, but I don't think they're the times that people laugh at it. And so I'm just reading kind of from the start. Only a little bit happened. You're not really sure about much of the world or anything yet. It's what I'm reading is going to skip a little bit, just to kind of give you a little bit of insight before we get into what situation's happening now. So this is Coffee Cars and Necromancy. I landed with a thud, knees and palms stinging as they hit the protective layer of hardened resin. Only one place in all the grey world had this flaw. This is where it all began. Grey World 101 did not have the complications of rocket science, though it did usually take new minions of death a while to take in the reality of what they saw and what they felt. One doesn't simply stand in the cavernous central a chamber of death, for the first time and not feel overwhelmed by the sepia-toned decor of bones. From full skeletons to disarticulated sections, the place was decorated in such a fashion that there was nowhere to look and not see a bone. Why did you bring me back here? Why not just walk me through to the end? You finally have your excuse to do it. I asked, looking up at her profile. I imagined her back in the days before she became a necromancer. I could see her being sketched in the light and shadows of a drawing room, the curves of her face with its strong chin and prominent nose. From where I remained on the floor of Death's central chamber, I could almost admire the general of the necromancers. Except, of course, I knew Heyman, and we had never gotten along, not once in my 50 years. I would also like to know the answer to that. Death didn't yell, though their voice filled the room. I turned to watch as they rose from their throne, the dark, heavy-looking cloak swirled around their feet, and their cowl perched perfectly atop their head. Death, a soul has been pinned, trapped to the mortal flesh. Theoman's words came out in a rush because of her. The Lakai? Explain. Death looked down at me. The pressure of their gaze rested like a physical weight upon me. It's Katie, the one I told you about. I looked up from half-closed lids, not wanting death to see just how much fear and pain I knew swarmed in my eyes. Without words, I begged for them to understand, to see what had happened without making me retell it, without making me relive the nightmare. The one you wished to become a necromancer? Their voice revealed nothing, but their eyes flickered, fiery flames licking against black irises. Their beauty paralleled their power, but I saw the danger lurking in the depths of every slight movement. I nodded, biting my tongue from words that would only make us linger longer, painfully aware that every moment we remained here was another moment Katie's soul remained trapped. What of her? Death's words held a tightness new to my ears. She killed herself, I said. The edges of a sob stopped any more words from coming out. Death paused and got that look on their face, the look that told us they were checking the gates at the furthest end of the grey world. She has not crossed either gate, light or dark. Nor does she wait to cross. They stared at me, waiting for her response. Waiting for my response. Fear, raw and ragged, rippled around my edges. For all that I adored and admired death, there remained inside of me always a fear of their power, a fear of them. Despite what Heyman believed, and despite my actions, there was still fear. But the fear had never been like this. Screw fear and cowering. I would admit to my flaws. I looked over at Heyman. She narrowed her eyes at me, lips pressed into thin lines. Her eyes were stones that could have literally killed me if she were given even the smallest amount of power over me. I tried to change her, I admitted through a thick throat. Oh, Lilakai, a stone gargoyle would have been able to call my name using a softer tone. What are you, Lilakai? I am a minion of death. I said the words I knew by heart, but they tasted like ash on my tongue. I am a necromancer. I am one of many in a vast sea. And your job? I collect the souls of the dead. I place your mark on the bones left behind. I lead the souls to their final walk. And who am I? Now Death's words were slower, harder around the edges. You are Death. You rule everything within the grey world. You alone hold the power to change mortal to minion. My heart beat with a thud against my ribs, and then another. Lilakai, with me now. Death walked between the gap of me and Heyman, not breaking their stride as they spoke. Heyman, direct Sarah and Kinsley to watch the gates, permission for extra keepers, should they feel the need. Yes, Death. Heyman walked off without even a casual glance back at me, as I turned to follow Death. Not even getting a smirk from Heyman did not bode well for the depth of trouble I had placed myself in. Death's grip on my arm made Heyman's own vice-like grip comparison to a lover's caress. I scurried to match Death's stride, step for step. I had little choice. I had to either keep up or be dragged. My own door whisked by without acknowledgement. A few heads appeared from doorways and disappeared just as quickly. I met my best friend's eyes, and her face paled more than her usual chalky complexion. But I didn't care. I was simply grateful to see her. At least she knew something had happened. She knew I hadn't just disappeared without a word, without a care. I mouthed a quick sorry, hoping she understood. Her wide grey eyes, blue fire flickering within, filled with tears. Breathe. Death's single command warranted no time for an answer before we stepped out of the building. Outside of Death's castle, the heavy, thick fog of the grey world loomed. Death walked with the confidence of unnumbered years. We stopped at the barrier to the green world. It shimmered like rain on an oil slick, one moment black and the next purple, then yellow, and finally green. The fog of the grey world dissolved behind us as we drew closer to the vertical oil slick. Shimmering between worlds took energy and permission. Stepping through the actual barriers was in Death's power alone. And that's where I'll stop. And so there we go. That was just a little bit of the basically the prequel, not prequel, the prologue. That's the one of Coffee Cars and Necromancy. So.
Thanks so much, Neen. So I never asked you this. I edited this book and I never asked you. So this book is about like a group of people that work for death that are going around reaping the dead. Where did you get the idea from?
A meme. Originally, I got the idea from a meme. Well, actually, I think it was a combination of things, but one of them was a meme. And just these sort of like death memes that people would send me, because my favorite place to basically be is in a graveyard. I love writing in graveyards. I love just contemplating the universe there. And so I got sent a meme, and it was like of a sad Grim Reaper, you know, kind of, I'm just trying to help them get through, you know, like, and that whole idea that, you know, death is punished when they're the most natural thing sort of with life. Yeah. I also read a short story about death being like in a corporate world, and it was like a business transaction, and that entertained me immensely. So I kind of combined these ideas and created these parallel worlds and kind of evolved from that.
So Mezzy asks, and this is a good one, because like usually when you find necromancers in stories, they're usually bad people, which, you know, makes sense. But Mezzy asks, what made you want to write a story with a with necromancy?
Because of that very thing that you just said, David. It's always, the necromancers always these bad people, but what if they weren't? It also, I've always been interested with the idea of being able to communicate with the dead. I remember, probably way younger than I should have read it, reading Brian Lumley's Necroscope series, and being fascinated by it. I look back now and know the writing's very 80s and old school and that stuff, but the stories behind it and just the whole ideas were fabulous, and it's definitely influenced some of this story.
Brilliant stuff. Well, thank you so much for reading. I have put Neen's links in the chat, so please check them out if you are looking for amazing and fresh and sapphic urban fantasy with an Australian flavour. Because there's not just this book, but there are other books that Neen does, and they're all great. So thank you so
They're
much,
all
Neen.
set in Australia, fantasies, because we don't have enough of them set in Australia. Everyone thinks it's got to be these bigger continents, but what if it wasn't?
It's just Mad Max and Home and Away and Neighbours, isn't it? So which is quite the big difference. So thank you, Neen. We are going to finish off with our final reading of our very first indie fantasy convention with one of the most kind of supportive people in the IFA group that isn't one of the admins, which is David Trotter. So here's David, brilliant writer. Please take it away.
Well, I appreciate that, other David. I come with a heavy heart to say I don't have a cool European accent. I'm from Arkansas, so if a little Southern comes through, I apologize. But I'll do the absolute best. Don't write Southern books either. I do have a fun one called Moonshine Mages that's coming out in the future, but we'll get there later. I'm actually really happy. I just came off of the other panel, and they were talking about lit RPG a lot. And so I'm actually taking a risk. I traditionally write heavy epic fantasies, big, heavy, thick books. This is a epic, or this is a YA, more middle grade, even like think Percy Jackson meets Legend of Zelda. I love video games. I grew up on them. So we're going to just jump right in. So if you've never read lit RPG, you're going to get a little bit of a taste. I will say this is unedited, and I am a little dyslexic, so I'll do my best, but I am really excited to read this because it's a lot of fun. I have had so much fun writing it, so I'm just going to dive in. So, oof. I hit the ground hard. The impact took the wind from my lungs and sent spots of pulsating white and ziggy blue lines flashing across my vision. My first reaction was to cry out, but I found I could do no such thing. My second was running my hands all over my body to make sure nothing was protruding where it shouldn't be. As I was haphazardly combing myself for bodily injury, I heard a whimper. Georgia. I rubbed at my eyes and took a look about me, unsure if my vision was still messed up because the colors that flooded my eyes did not seem real. But I did not have time for that now. Georgia was somewhere, and she sounded hurt. Now, as I just said, there were strange colors at the bottom of this cavern, and they were way too bright. Not just their hue, it was way too bright down here to be in a cave. Moss and fungi brilliantly blue like electricity from a comic book. Mushrooms that didn't look like anything I'd ever seen before, and the moss that shone with iridescent light. A stream ran down through the cavern, and where the water met the stones, scale-like gleaming formations manifested. How hard did I hit my head? Georgia, I managed to wheeze out the word, though my voice sounded as though a truck was parked on my chest. When I finally spotted her, something odd was hovering over her. Now I knew something was up. 3 little hearts hung just above her head. 2 of them were dull red. The third one, half dull, half vibrant and blinking. 2 small bars were beneath the hearts, though they were very, very short, one blue and the other green. Off to one side, what I could only describe as an icon appeared. Georgia Stoddard, human, level 2. Special skill, insightful glance. What in the world was going on? I looked down at my hands, and it's by some random magic I saw my own name marked in that same scrolling silver script. It read, Archibald Archie Chadwick Lawrence Jr. Level 1. Health points, 2 out of 3. Focus points, 0. Endurance, 3. I cried out in fear, shaking my hands as though I could fling the text away. And to my surprise, the text floated before my eyes vanished in an instant. The suddenness of it all made me jump, causing me to lose my balance and fall into some of the glowing fungi. Bright caps! The word echoed in my ears as my hands sunk into the squishy mushrooms. Bright caps are a common item used for crafting potions. Don't just eat them raw. Do you want to add to your inventory? 2 words appeared floating before my eyes. Yes. No. I screamed. I had hit my head too hard, and I was clearly losing my mind. Archie! Georgia's shout brought me out of my spiraling confusion and panic. The words flashed away as I lifted my head from the mooshed mushrooms. I began to crawl towards my friend, hoping beyond hope she was all right. And I'm not seeing what I was seeing. Archie, there are words everywhere, and I'm blinking. Why am I blinking? Georgia cried out, panic overtaking her words as she stumbled around on the ground. Oh no. She was seeing them too. I looked about, frantically searching for any sign of what could be causing it. Could it be the mushrooms? I'd never really messed with any of that stuff, but I had friends online that said they had went on some wild trips before. Maybe that's what was happening. The question was, did I tell Georgia I was seeing the same? Would it make it better or worse? Then I remembered I was a terrible liar and we needed to be open with each other about what was going on if we wanted to get out of here. I see them too, I said, trying my best to keep the hysteria out of my voice, which I was failing miserably at. I sounded like a dog's used squeaker toy. I cleared my throat. It's okay. We're going to be okay. It's going to be okay. Though I think that was more for myself than her. I think I broke my leg, Georgia said, her voice tight with pain. It hurts so bad. When I got to her, I could see the twisted way her leg lay, bent at an unnatural angle. Just the sight of it made me queasy, and I almost lost my lunch all over the cavern floor. That bad, Georgia said, a hand against her brow. She had laid back down, seeming unable to hold herself up in a seated position. It's going to be okay, I said shakily. I'd been reaching for my pocket in an attempt to pull out my phone. What I retrieved was a shattered bit facsimile of what once was my iPhone. My heart sank. I had only been to 1 or 2 wilderness survival trips with Dad when I was 11 and 12. He had wanted me to join the Boy Scouts. I had begrudgingly went for 2 years until Mom finally convinced Dad it wasn't for me. You have a phone? I asked, shoving my mangled mess back into my pocket. My bag, grunted Georgia, unable to say much now. The little half heart pulsated ominously. I tried to ignore it as I pulled open her backpack. Suddenly, dozens of texts began to spring up in front of my vision. Inventory, flashlight, batteries, 81%, Band-Aid, +1 to health, quantity, 6. Earth technology communication device, broken, value, 0. Books, 3, value, undetermined. Consumables, canteen with raw earth water, 61% full. Bonus feature, none. Granola bar, +1 to endurance for 5 minutes. Granola bar, +1 to endurance for 5 minutes. Granola bar, +1 to endurance for 5. I waved my hand to waft it away, trying to get towards the bandages. My leg, it's broken, not scraped, Georgia said when she saw me hurriedly trying to open the little Band-Aid. I just need to try something, I said, as I finally got the stupid wrapper off. I moved quickly at first, but then stopped suddenly. Georgia was wearing shorts, and I was, well, it felt kind of weird for me to touch her bare leg. Can I just put the stupid Band-Aid on, Boy Scout? She cried. I dropped down on my knees and placed the adhesive to her skin randomly. What happened next made my eyes go wide. There's a subtle blip, followed by a ding. One of Georgia's dull hearts flashed vibrantly once more. Elated, I rushed back to the backpack without uttering a word. Inventory, flashlight, batteries, 81%, Band-Aids, +1 to health, quantity, 5. I swung it away again, shouting, go away, as I ran back to her, repeating it over and over again until finally her leg was healed. I then sat back, looking at my hands, and said out loud, oh my God, I think we're in a game. Georgia burst out laughing. I did not. I wasn't kidding. I needed to figure out more before I brought it up again. I think I can stop there unless.
No, that's brilliant. Thank you so much. That was excellent.
Yeah.
Okay, I've got so many questions, but I have to just limit it to like one. Oh God, what shall I ask? What is your favorite Zelda game? That's what I need to know.
Ooh. So, as an edgy boy, I really like Twilight Princess, but I mean, the OG Ocarina of Time for 3D Zelda is fantastic. But I've played them all. They all hold a special place in my heart.
That's interesting. Except for 2, yeah. That's interesting that you say that. So I think this might be an age thing as well, because like Twilight Princess was the one where I was like not quite as into it. Ocarina of Time is my one, right? So you Kickstarter. Obviously, you kind of compare it to Legend of Zelda. Even the art, the kind of graphic that you have for the Kickstarter is kind of it evokes it as well. What is it about lit RPG? Why did you decide to go down that route?
I have a boy, Oliver, call him Ollie, which is something David and I have in common. And he has started reading. I don't believe he could handle something like this. This is a little much for a kid who's almost 9. But he loves to play games with me. And so I was like, what if I wrote something he could actually read and enjoy? I just started writing, and I love the Zelda games. I love Dungeon Crawler Carl. I love He Who Fights Monsters. The Cradle series is something I've been following for forever. I mean, that guy's been writing those for an eternity. So, and then believe it or not, since David is on here, he writes such great comedy, and we met a few years ago, and I read several of his books, the one with the stable hand and the donkey, and sorry if I butchered the name, but it was so funny, and I had a great time. And I was like, I'm not funny, but I can pretend to be. So I just delved right into it.
Well, there you go. So people, all the links are in the chat. The link to David's work and the Kickstarter for the Legend of Neverwhere is there. It's not launched yet, so please follow it. Following Kickstarters makes such a huge difference to Kickstarters that are about to launch. So please just give it a follow. And
I do have a narrator set for that, so I've already got a contracted narrator, so you don't have to worry about my voice. So,
well, I like to listen to you read, but you know, he's writing it, it's getting out there for his son to enjoy as well. How wholesome can you get? So please go and follow it. Everyone, thank you so much, David, Neen, David. I have to put Neen in between the two like a sandwich because it can't be David, Neen, Neen, David, David, Neen, David. Sorry about the image, but we're gonna roll with it. Okay.
All right, David.
Thanks so much for coming on. Please check out our amazing authors in the chat and the comments. If you're listening on YouTube or watching on YouTube, comments will be there as well. Thank you so much, and please check them out.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, y'all. Thanks, David.